Alright, so we're back here on WrestleRant. I'm Graham Jason Matthews, and today we're breaking down the 1994 WWE SummerSlam pay-per-view event as seen on the WWE Network. My apologies for bringing this video up late. It was supposed to be up this past weekend, but with vacation and whatnot, I was unable to watch the event in the last week or so. I thought I was going to do it last week, but I was so busy on vacation and doing other stuff over the weekend with the holiday and whatever. It got pushed back a little bit, got finished watching the event just on Monday, and here we are today for my full review of the show. Not many matches, so this review won't be very long. I thought it was a decent show on the whole. Let's break it down, starting with the first match, a tag team match, pitting IRS and Bam Bam Bigelow against the Head Shrinkers, Fatu and Samu. And just a regular old tag team match, no tag team titles on the line, just a regular tag team bout. It was fine for what it was. I'm a huge fan, or was a huge fan, of the tag team wrestling. I mean, it's not like I was around at that period in time, but in watching older pay-per-views from the 80s and the early 90s, the tag team matches on those pay-per-views are top-notch. And this is 94. This is kind of getting into the era where the tag team wrestling was not as good. This was a decent match. You had Ted DiBiase in Bam Bam Bigelow's corner, and the corner of IRS and Bam Bam Bigelow, a part of the $1 Million Corporation, and they did win the match via disqualification. It was a fine match. I didn't really mind it that much, but the non-finish or the DQ finish, whatever, really didn't, was not the best way of kicking off the show. If they started the show, hell, with the women's title match, I think I would have been happier than having this match kick off the show, have the non-finish, whatever. It was a decent match. Don't really remember much about it. It wasn't, terrible, not terrible or anything like that, but just kind of unspectacular, if nothing else. Up next, as I mentioned, the Women's Championship matchup between Alundra Blaze, the defending champion, and the challenger Bull Nakano, and a great match, easily better than any women's match you'll see in WWE today. And that's not a knock on the women of today. As I've talked about before, it's all in the booking and how they handle their characters and whatnot, and creative just completely neglecting the Divas division in today's day and age in WWE. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. But you put, the women of today are right up there with the women that were there, that were, leading the division back in 93. This is the run of the period in time they were resurrecting the women's championship, the women's division in WWE, with Alundra Blaze kind of leading the charge of women's wrestling, one of the pioneers of women's wrestling in not only WWE, just wrestling in general. And that's why I was so shocked it took her so long to get into the WWE Hall of Fame up until, this past year. I mean, I know she left the company on not so great terms back in 95, 96, but still, she was one of the people that made that division what it was in 93, 94, 95 when she was leading the revolution, the women's wrestling revolution in WWE. But this was a great match. Bull Nakano was very great in her own right. Hopefully, she'll be in the WWE Hall of Fame at some point. She wasn't there for very long, but the impact that she had, while brief, was very big. It was very historic for the women's wrestling, as I mentioned, for the WWE during that period in time, a revolutionary, so to speak. But I really enjoyed this match. I thought it was actually probably one of the better wrestled matches on this show. Got about 8 minutes long. Alundra Blaze coming out of this match victorious, still the WWF Women's Champion. But yeah, a really, really good match that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it's a shame that, even at that point, the women weren't like main eventing pay-per-views or Raws or whatever. This is only 94, a year after Raw debuted, but they weren't given crappy storylines. I'm sure they probably weren't even given many storylines at all, but at least they can go out there. They were given the time to have a great match, and, unlike today where they only give them a few minutes, or, at least 20 years ago, you knew who was the babyface, you knew who was the heel. You had Alundra Blaze as the perennial babyface, and then you had Luna Vachon backing up Bull Nakano as this heel tandem. These two women that you just couldn't help but hate. So the characters were very well defined, unlike today when you have the Bella Twins, who were babyfaces one week, heel the next. And again, not a knock on them, not a reflection on their talent, but rather the creative team and how they were handled. Comparing them to today. Up next, Razor Ramon for the Intercontinental Championship, challenging for the gold against Diesel. And a really good matchup, for what it was. It wasn't terrific or anything. It wasn't as good as the match from 2 years ago or even the match from the year prior between Shawn Michaels and Mr. Perfect, or Shawn Michaels and, what was the match from 92? Oh, right, Bret Hart and British Bulldog in the main event of SummerSlam in England. So not as great of a matchup, but for what it was solid. I thought it told a really good story. Kind of funny seeing three Clique members in the same match, involved in the same match together. Diesel, Shawn Michaels, and Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, whatever. And two of the guys that would start the NWO over in WCW only 2 years after this. Razor Ramon and Diesel, later known as Scott Hall and Kevin Nash by their real names in WCW. So it's kind of funny seeing them going one-on-one on this show for the Intercontinental Championship, no less. So it was not the instant classic that those other matches were that I previously mentioned with Shawn Michaels, Mr. Perfect, British Bulldog, and Bret Hart. They weren't as great of a workers as those guys were, but for this story they were trying to tell, I thought it was good. Shawn Michaels kind of, and kind of a reverse from the year prior. Like I mentioned in my 1993 review of SummerSlam, you had Shawn Michaels defending his Intercontinental Championship against Mr. Perfect, with Diesel in his corner, who kind of, he was the one that was the deciding factor. He was the X factor in that matchup that helped Shawn retain his IC Championship. 1 year later, Shawn Michaels, the roles are kind of reversed. Shawn Michaels is in the corner of Diesel, helping him retain his Intercontinental Championship against a very familiar foe in Razor Ramon, who had beaten Shawn Michaels, or had won the match at WrestleMania for the Intercontinental Championships at WrestleMania 10 only a few months before this. But yeah, I thought this was a pretty good match for what it was, kind of a different wrestling match than what we were used to getting at this period in time over the Intercontinental Championship. But Razor Ramon emerges victorious and is the new Intercontinental Champion. So a good match, thoroughly enjoyed it for what it was. Up next, we had Tatanka taking on Lex Luger. So the story behind this matchup was that in the months and weeks leading into this event, Tatanka had accused Lex Luger of selling out. You had all these vignettes and video packages kind of recapping. I mean, this was before the days when you had the promos and stuff, like the big, elaborate video packages we get of today. Back in the 80s or 90s or whatever, even up until the late 1990s, you wouldn't get the video packages. You would get literally just the recaps of what happened up to that point. And I'm sure for people that had already seen it, it was kind of we got to watch this footage again, like all 6 video packages or all 6 recaps of everything that has happened in the feed up to this point. So for those people, I sympathize with them, but for someone like me that was not watching regular, I wasn't even alive at this period in time. This is 1994. I was born in 95. But, for someone like me that wasn't really, that is not all that knowledgeable about this period in WWE, the 1990s, the early 90s anyway, it really helped to kind of help me get acclimated with the feuds, the storylines, whatever. I thought that was definitely effective for this matchup between Luger and Tatanka. So anyway, Luger was accused by Tatanka of selling out to the $1 Million Corporation, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, much like Sapphire from a couple years prior. And with that being said, that forced them to, face off in this contest one-on-one. And then Ted DiBiase ended up coming out to ringside. I don't know what the general fan reaction or what the belief was at that period in time, if people actually thought that Lex Luger was going to sell out to the $1 Million Corporation or whatever. This is the same guy that 1 year prior was in the main event of SummerSlam contending for the WWE Championship. And it just goes to show that what I was saying about Lex Luger in that review, was absolutely true. He still had the star-spangled stripes, the star-spangled attire, on this show. Still very pro-USA, but the whole Lex Express and everything else about that match, all the hype and the USA stuff, that was really the only reason why he was over. Because he was a heavy patriot, people loved him, whatever. Because he was a patriot and he was representing the USA. That's the only reason, or one of the very few reasons, why people actually, took to Lex Luger in the build to SummerSlam 1993. He was built up the right way. I got to give him credit where credit is due. Leading up to this pay-per-view, Lex Luger was very much cooled down from the year prior. Still kind of a top player for what it was. Somewhat. He was in not one of the final matches on this show, but it was not like the first match or the second match or whatever. I think he was in the opening match of WrestleMania of that year. I think WrestleMania 10 he was in the opening match. Or no, he was not. That was the same year that he contended for the championship. I'm thinking of WrestleMania the following year, WrestleMania 11. But anyway, this match was okay. It wasn't great. It succeeded in telling a story and thinking that, oh no, Lex Luger is actually siding with, the $1 Million Corporation because Ted DiBiase's out at ringside, and the whole swerve of the century afterwards, after Tatanka takes advantage of the distraction by DiBiase at ringside, rolls up Lex Luger, picks up the win, and afterwards, when DiBiase and Lex Luger are coming face-to-face, Tatanka, for the swerve of the century, as I mentioned, turning on Lex Luger, turning heel, and joining the $1 Million Corporation. And the crowd, they didn't really, they didn't boo, they didn't care. And I don't know if it was the crowd or what, but it's funny, too, that I review this. It's kind of fitting, because Raw was in Chicago on Monday, And this event took place in Chicago, and you would never know. I mean, it's not just a recent thing that Chicago, since 2011 has been a great wrestling crowd. That's always been the case. They've always been an amazing wrestling city, dating back to the early WrestleManias, 20, 30 years ago. This is not a very recent thing that Chicago has been a great wrestling town or great wrestling crowd. So, and I figured they wouldn't, you wouldn't even assume that by watching this pay-per-view, because they weren't really into many of the matches, and that's not, I don't think, a reflection on the crowd, but rather what they were giving them on this show. Not a lot of great matches in the main event slot anyway. And I'll get to the WWE Championship match in a second, which was phenomenal, and why the Chicago crowd came alive for that, undoubtedly and unsurprisingly. But anyway, the Tatanka heel turn did not go over very well. People were like, maybe they expected it, I have no idea. But it's Tatanka joining the $1 Million Corporation. The idea of that happening was not very popular at that period in time. I don't know why it would need to happen. Maybe just for a good surprise, I get that. But other than that, though, it was kind of like, cool. I guess a Lex Luger, Ted DiBiase feud, and Luger was gone from the company shortly thereafter. He left it for WCW the following year on the debut episode of Monday Night Nitro. Obviously, one of the biggest one of the biggest switch, one of the biggest crossovers, I guess, in wrestling history, when he appeared on Raw and Nitro on the same night at the same time simultaneously. The match was okay. The swerve, it was an effective swerve. I just don't think a lot of people cared. It's not like there was a huge gasp from the crowd during when Tatanka turned heel. Like I said, maybe people just saw it coming. Maybe it was that obvious. I'm not really sure. But it's not an angle that lit the world on fire, so to speak. Up next, we had Jeff Jarrett versus Mabel, later known as Big Daddy V, King Mabel, Viscera, whatever you want to call him. That's who was in action in this matchup against Jeff Jarrett. In a match I really did not care for whatsoever. 6-minute match, could have gone 2 minutes for all I cared. Mabel coming out with the Men on a Mission, which was an atrocious gimmick, very reminiscent of the New Day when they were babyfaces. The New Day is so much greater now that they're heels, but this is what, the New Day reminded a lot of people of Men on a Mission. Again, a crappy gimmick that no one really cared about. The crowd was kind of into it for what it was, but the guy was not a great worker. And this is the same guy. Mabel, I respect him. R.I.P., I believe he passed away last year. But this is the same guy who was main eventing SummerSlam the following year with Kevin Nash, I believe, of all people. So that really goes to show how great, what the year in WWE was in 1995, and I believe that was a shit show. So can't wait to watch that show and review it. Sarcastically speaking, come next week or this weekend, whatever. But yeah, this match was exactly what you would expect it to be. It was really, I don't even know what the point of it was. Jeff Jarrett, I believe, had just come into the WWE. And people didn't really take to him. He's never drawn a dime in his life, as the old saying goes. And then Mabel was part of Men on a Mission. That's really all that I could say about it. The match wasn't good. I really saw no reason why it had to happen. And Jeff Jarrett won, and that was about it. But we get to the true main event of the night, which did not take place last on the show for whatever reason, which is still mind-boggling to me, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the true main event on this show, for the WWF Championship, a steel cage match with Bret Hart defending against his brother, Owen Hart. Now, I love their match at WrestleMania 10. It goes down, or has gone down, as one of the greatest WrestleMania matches, or just greatest wrestling matches of all time, and rightfully so. It's really hard to say which one was better, this match or that match. A lot of people are going to probably say the WrestleMania match, but I think this match was very underrated as well. Like I said before, the Chicago crowd, you would have never known this show took place in Chicago, because they didn't come alive for a lot of the matches later on in the card, in the second half of the show. But they definitely came alive for this match. These people were red hot for this contest. I thought this was great. Constantly shifting, the momentum constantly shifting back and forth between the two competitors, telling a great story. As I mentioned with the Luger and Tatanka match, the video packages they aired going into this contest, talking about, not even stuff leading into this pay-per-view in just the last couple of months, but rather the whole feud dating back to Survivor Series 1993, 9 months earlier, when Owen Hart first debuted in WWE. No, not his debut appearance, but when he first came out of the scene, started tag teaming with Bret Hart, the heel turn, the match, winning King of the Ring, and all that stuff was greatly, I thought it was awesome the way they kind of ran down what had happened up to this point, give it that big fight feel that it truly deserved. And I wrote an article last year for What Culture ranking the top 10 best WWE Championship matches in SummerSlam history, and I believe this one was either 1 or 2. It was up there with John Cena and Daniel Bryan from a couple years ago, and if it wasn't number 2, if it wasn't number 1, it was certainly up there, but I'm pretty sure it was. But just that, the whole year of 1994 was all about Bret Hart and Owen Hart. I know you had Yokozuna in there, and The Undertaker, Kevin Nash, Ramon, all these other guys, Shawn Michaels. having great years as well, but that year was the year of Owen Hart and Bret Hart, the whole feud, and that's a great long-term booking. I'm not sure they had this in mind when they put the when they started the whole feud in late 1993. I'm pretty sure they didn't. Maybe they did. I have no idea. But still, I mean, that was that kind of booking, that kind of storytelling that I'm a fan of, and that's why I love this match as much as I did. Not only that, too, not only the long-term booking of the feud, the rivalry, but like I said before, the match itself was great. I thought the in-ring action was awesome. The momentum constantly shifting back and forth, as I mentioned before. A lot of close near falls. Both guys ascending the cage, and I can't remember if there were pinfalls or submissions. I don't think there was, but both guys climbing the cage and a lot of close calls. Like, oh, is Owen Hart going to win? Is he going to win the championship? And they also kind of gave it that personal feel to it, too. I mean, as if the feud wasn't personal enough. They interviewed, I think it was when they were putting up the cage, they wanted to kill some time. They were interviewing Stu Hart at ringside and the British Bulldog and Jim Neidhart and all these other guys, part of the Hart family, to kind of make this feud feel more personal. Thankfully, we didn't get any interference. I mean, that's one of the biggest, gripes that I have with steel cage matches this day and age, is that we get way too much interference in a match that's supposed to prevent it. If anything, the steel cage match welcomes interference more than it does to prevent it in 2015. This has been the case for years now, but at least in this match, there was none of that. I thought this was a great match, thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a fantastic main event. Not the main event, but it should have been. But anyway, Bret Hart emerges victorious, just barely. Him and Owen, just hanging out of the side of the cage on the outside. Bret Hart is the first one to jump down, retain his championship, still the WWF champion. So out comes Jim Neidhart. He starts attacking his brother Bret. He throws him into the ring. They lock him inside the ring. And British Bulldog ultimately climbs up the cage. They start brawling. I believe they got the better of the heels. Owen Hart and Jim Neidhart just flee from the ring and leave the ring to the baby faces to celebrate. So the post-match stuff, maybe they were teasing a future tag team match. Maybe it set up something at Survivor Series. I'm not sure. Got to continue watching old WWF pay-per-views to find out, I guess. But I thought this was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. One of, if not the greatest match in SummerSlam history, like I mentioned. If not the greatest WWE title match, but, even bigger than that. Excuse me. One of the biggest matches in SummerSlam history. I mean, like I said before, it's hard to compare this match with the WrestleMania match because both were so great. But with this one being inside the steel cage and you throw in the WWE Championship being on the line, it's really hard to top it. So I love this match and everything else that came with it. Just fantastic stuff from start to finish. And then we get to the main event, the actual main event, for whatever reason. And I'll rant on this briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time, and I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about it. But we get to the main event, The Undertaker versus The Underfaker, as he was being called at that time, who's being portrayed by Bryan Lee. Of course, The Undertaker, the real Undertaker, had taken time off after Royal Rumble to rehab I believe a shoulder injury or a back injury, I think it was. So in his absence, Paul Bearer was saying, where's The Undertaker? Where's The Undertaker? They put some sleuths on it to kind of figure out where he was. And Ted DiBiase had brought back The Undertaker, but it wasn't actually him. He paid him off. It was Bryan Lee, like I mentioned before, whose career really went down, where I believe he had a later run in WWF as changed in like 1997 or 98, whatever. Just years later, a part of the Attitude Era. But that was the whole grand return for The Undertaker, for him to come back and face The Underfaker, as fans were calling him, in his return match. And the match sucked. The match was not good at all. I mean, the fans were excited to see the real Undertaker back. I mean, the commentary team was trying to tell the story that, oh, wow, we have two Undertakers at the same time. Which one's the real one? Blah, 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 blah. I get that aspect of it, but the match itself was not good. I mean, The Undertaker, like I've said before, is aged like a fine wine, and that his matches have only gotten better since this period in time. His matches early on in his career were not good at all. I mean, more often than not, his matches sucked with whoever he was working with, and I thought this match was no exception. I mean, I hated that match with Johnny Gonzalez the year before. That was probably worse. Nothing's going to beat that in terms of like what sucks when it comes to Undertaker matches. But this wasn't much better at all. And the fact this got the main event was mind-boggling to me. They got 9 minutes, which, I mean, is both a long time and a short time, especially for a main event of a pay-per-view. It could have gone 30 seconds, and it could have gone 30 seconds, and I wouldn't have given a shit. But it was so terribly wrestled. They had zero chemistry. They tried to kind of hide their weaknesses by going for finishers and whatever else. And then, meanwhile, the WWF Championship match, one of the greatest matches, like I said before, in SummerSlam history for the title, for the championship. It wasn't even like it was a non-title, a feud match, a rivalry match, a grudge match, whatever. That was second to last to this crap, and that was garbage. And I know the people are probably, paying to watch this pay-per-view to see the return of The Undertaker. I get that, but would it have killed them to put it at least second to last? I mean, they probably still would have complained, but to put that in the main event over Bret Hart and Owen Hart would have been garbage. It was a great match. I really enjoyed it for what it was. Bret Hart and Owen Hart, that is. But the main event I thought was complete crap, and the fact that took precedence over the WWF Championship match was ridiculous. That whole pay-per-view was probably sold on The Undertaker coming back, but that was really no excuse. They could have put that second to last and it would have made a lick of a difference. But still, though, you could still go back and watch this pay-per-view on the WWE Network solely for the WWF Championship match. Easily, hands down, the best match on this show. But overall, though, I thought it was a decent show. It wasn't a terrible show by any stretch. It wasn't a great show. It wasn't even a good show. It was okay for what it was. But that WWF Championship match really saved this pay-per-view in terms of being decent. If it wasn't for that match, this pay-per-view would probably be pretty mediocre. But that match took this pay-per-view over the top. And the rest of the card wasn't really that bad as well. I mean, the Undertaker stuff was not great. That was a piece of crap. In the main event especially. Jarrett and Mabel was a waste of time. Tatanka and Luger, the match was okay. The angle was okay. I'm sure the long-term storytelling of that was not, the biggest possible payoff they could do, but it served its purpose. The Razor Ramon and Diesel stuff I liked. Lunder Blaze and Bull Nakano, I almost made the same mistake that Michael Cole did a couple days ago. Was really good, and the opening tag was okay for what it was too. But still, I didn't really hate it all that much. I thought that match, and I thought the pay-per-view on the whole was pretty passable. I thought it was good. But, just good stuff overall. I wouldn't recommend going back and watching the whole pay-per-view. I'm sure it was better than 95, which I do have to watch at some point, which I'm sure was not a great show, from what I heard this week, and that should be up on Saturday. So we are going to get back on track. Today is the 94 review, Saturday is 95, and Sunday should be 96, and we should be back on track after missing this past weekend for the reviews of SummerSlam. But nevertheless, though, you guys can show your support by finding me on Facebook, facebook.com/GrahamDadGSM.Matthews. Find me on Twitter. Follow me there at WrestleRant. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you on Saturday for my full review of SummerSlam 1995.